Have you ever wondered what it felt like to be the first man to climb the wall during a siege in ancient Rome? Not as a hero, not as a legend, but as a man who was already dead before he even set foot on the ladder. This is not a story about bravery. It's a story about sacrifice, about fear, and about a truth no Roman commander would ever admit. The first man on the wall wasn't chosen for courage. He was chosen to die. Why was the first man on the wall doomed? Imagine this. You are a legionary. You've trained for years, marched through mountains, fought in snow and desert, survived hunger and disease. Now you stand before a city wall, tall, thick, guarded by archers and spearmen. Your commander raises his hand. The signal is given, ladders rise, soldiers rush forward, and one man must go first. But here's the catch. If he fails, he is killed on the spot. Why? Because in ancient Rome, failure at the wall wasn't just a mistake. It was a crime against the army, against the state, against the very soul of the legions. So why did they send someone so far ahead? Was it honor, strategy, or something darker? Let's begin with the facts. During every siege in ancient Rome, the first climber, the man who went first over the wall, was the most dangerous role in the entire assault. He had to climb without a shield, without armor, only a sword and bare hands. Why? Because if he carried a shield, he would block the others. He had to move fast. He had to be light and reckless. But here's the real horror. If he didn't make it over the wall within a set time, usually less than 3 minutes, he was killed by his own comrades. Not by enemy arrows, not by stones, but by Roman soldiers behind him. They were ordered to destroy him, to prevent panic, to show that no one was allowed to hesitate. No one could weaken. This wasn't punishment for failure. It was a ritual of discipline, a message. If you're not ready to die for Rome, die now. And yet the most shocking part, those who volunteered for this role weren't cowards. They were the bravest, those who dreamed of glory, those who wanted to be remembered. But history shows something terrible. Almost all of them died. And why? Because they were sent to die. So why was the first man on the wall doomed? Because the Roman military system was built on absolute discipline, speed, and psychological pressure. The first climber wasn't a hero. He was human sacrifice. A test of will, a symbol of the cost of failure, and the Romans knew in their hearts that only the desperate, the fearless, or the reckless would take this role. And so, they used them. Why did Rome need a first climber? Now that we know the fate of the first man, we must ask, why did Rome need such a system at all? Wasn't there a better way to storm a wall? The answer lies in Roman military doctrine, a system so precise and strict that it made the legions the most effective fighting force of the ancient world. Rome didn't rely on individual bravery. It relied on unity, on coordination, on precision. Every legionary was trained to act as part of a machine. One soldier couldn't stop, couldn't hesitate, couldn't break formation. So when they attacked a fortified city, the plan was simple. Break through the wall, fast, before reinforcements arrived, but walls were high, and defenders had arrows, stones, and boiling oil, so the Romans developed a method. They used ladders, long, heavy wooden structures, and advanced them in waves. But here's the problem. If the first man failed, the whole assault could collapse. The ladders would be pulled back, the momentum would be lost, and the enemy would have time to regroup. So the solution was this: send one man forward, one man to test the wall. This man had one task: get over the wall fast, and open the gate for the rest. If he succeeded, he became a legend. If he failed, he became a warning. And the Romans were masters of psychology. They trained their soldiers not just to fight, but to fear failure more than death. So the first climber wasn't just a tactical choice. It was a psychological tool, a reminder that in the Roman army, no one was allowed to be weak. But there's another level one historians rarely speak of. The first climber was also a form of social control. In a legion of thousands, morale could drop, soldiers could grow tired, frustrated, rebellious. So commanders used the first climber as a public example. If someone refused to go, he was punished. If someone hesitated, he was executed. If someone died, the entire unit saw it. It was a lesson. You either obey the order or you die. And the best way to ensure obedience? Make the first climber a sacrifice. So why did Rome need the first climber? Because the Roman army wasn't built on bravery alone. It was built on fear, discipline, and ritualized sacrifice. The first climber wasn't just a soldier. He was a symbol, a tool, and a warning. Without him, the army could not function. Who became the first climber? Now we come to the most painful question. Who actually became the first climber? Did they choose the role themselves? Were they forced? Historical records, mainly from Roman writers like Vegetius and Polybius, say that the first climber was often voluntarily assigned. But why would anyone want to do this? The answer is complex and deeply human. First, there was glory. In Roman culture, Fame meant everything. To be remembered as the first man over the wall, this was a legacy. Even if you died, your name could live on. Second, there was promotion. If a man survived, he was often rewarded, promoted in rank, even given a place in the elite cohort. Third, and perhaps most important, there was duty. For many legionaries, serving Rome wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a sacred duty. And to die for Rome, especially in battle, was considered the highest honor. But here's the cruel irony. Most of these volunteers never made it. Archaeological findings from siege sites like Masada and Jerusalem show that many ladders were found broken, burned, or abandoned at the base of walls. And in some cases, bodies were discovered still clinging to the ladder's arms stretched out, weapons in hand. These were the first climbers, and their remains tell a story of desperation, of men who knew they would die, but went forward anyway. There's even a famous account from the siege of Jerusalem in the year 72 of the current era. According to Josephus, a Jewish historian, a Roman legionary named Marcus was chosen as the first climber. He said, "I am not afraid of death, I am afraid of shame." And then he climbed. He didn't make it. He was struck by an arrow, then thrown off by a stone. And in the end, according to Josephus, his own comrades killed him because he took too long. Yet his name was recorded, not as a coward, but as a man who gave everything. So who volunteered for this role? The men who believed in Rome? The men who feared shame more than death, the men who saw glory in sacrifice, and those who knew in their hearts that they would not return. They weren't heroes by modern standards, but in the eyes of Rome, they were legends. Was this practice common across the empire? Now we must ask, was the first climber used in every siege, or was it just a myth? Evidence shows it was widespread, but not universal. From Roman military manuals, especially from the late Republic and early Empire, we learn that the concept of a first climber was officially taught in military camps. Legionaries were trained to move in perfect formation, to attack in waves, and to always have a pioneer, a man who went ahead to test the ground. But the first climber, the one who climbed the ladder, wasn't always the same person. Sometimes it was a veteran, sometimes a young recruit, sometimes a slave. But the key factor was timing. If the attack began at dawn, the first climber had to be ready in seconds. If the enemy had archers, he had to move faster, and if he failed, the consequences were immediate. Historians like Arrian and Frontinus describe similar practices in other armies such as the Parthians and Gauls, but none were as formalized as the Roman system. And here's something even more terrifying. Some sources suggest the first climber wasn't always a volunteer. In times of crisis, when morale was low, commanders would randomly select men, or worse, punish a deserter by making him the first climber. One account from the civil war between Caesar and Pompey describes a soldier caught stealing food. Instead of imprisonment, he was told, "Climb the wall. If you fail, you die. If you succeed, you live." He climbed, he died, and the commander declared, "This is how we maintain order." So was this practice common across the empire? Yes, but not in every battle. It was used in major sieges where speed and surprise were crucial. It wasn't a rule, but a tactical option used when the stakes were highest. And though it may have been rare, its impact was immense, because the mere threat of it kept soldiers in line. It prevented hesitation and reminded every legionary, in Rome, failure is not an option. What can we learn from the first climber? Now we reach the final question. What does the first climber teach us about the Roman Empire? Was it a sign of strength or a sign of cruelty? The answer is both. The Roman army was one of the greatest institutions in human history. It conquered continents, built roads, cities, and laws, lasted for centuries. But it achieved this through discipline and sometimes through brutality. The first climber wasn't just a tactic, it was a reflection of Roman values. Order over chaos, duty over self-strength over weakness, glory over survival. And while we may see this as harsh, even barbaric, it worked. The legions were unstoppable because they were willing to do anything, even die for victory. But there's a deeper lesson. Today, we see similar systems in modern armies. We see soldiers pushed to their limits. We see rituals of sacrifice. We see the idea that some must suffer so others can succeed. And though we no longer execute soldiers for hesitation, we still punish them. We demote them, we shame them, we break them. So the first climber isn't just a relic of the past. It's a mirror. It shows how far humans will go to win, how much they're willing to lose, and how little it takes to turn a man into a legend or a corpse. So what can we learn from the first climber? That greatness is often built on sacrifice, that strength requires discipline, and that sometimes the bravest act isn't to survive, but to walk forward, knowing you will die. Because in the end, the first man on the wall wasn't a hero. He was a man who chose to face the unknown, not for himself, but for Rome. And that perhaps is the true meaning of loyalty. So the next time you hear about the Roman legions, remember this. They didn't conquer the world with swords alone. They conquered it with fear, faith in one man who climbed the wall and died. Subscribe for more stories from the shadows of history. Like if you learned something new, comment, would you be the first on the wall or the one who watched? Until next time, remember in Rome the first man dies, but the empire lives.